Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 26 of Ultimate Exotics, the review series for Gran Turismo's top tier selection of supercars. And this pick of vehicle could be potentially controversial, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with other people's ideas about this car, but for the sake of the series I will be including this car in the Ultimate Exotics category. It's the year 2000 Viper GTS-R concept car. Now, the reason why this may be slightly controversial is because this is the only Viper which I'll be including in this series. All of the other Vipers that I'm going to review, apart from the racing model, are going to be in the Super Sports series, because I consider the Viper to be just that, a super sports car. I have never, and probably will never, consider the Viper to be a supercar. In order for it to be a supercar, they would have to completely redesign it. It would probably have to become mid-engined at this point, and it would have to jump into a completely new level of performance. To me, the Viper has always been a super sports car. So why am I including this particular model in this series alongside supercars? Well, for the very simple reason that the GTS-R, although being a concept, is the only Viper to take what could have been a street-level Viper to a whole new level. Not just in terms of performance, but also in its marketing, in its design, and just in the whole intangible ethos and aura that the car has. Now, I know that by the nature of those statements, there are going to be people who disagree with that. This is very much so my opinion. Obviously, you could disagree with that, and you have every right to. But in my opinion, the GTS-R is the only Viper that can be called a supercar. It has that long tail, one of the biggest diffusers of any car I've ever seen, certainly one of the biggest diffusers in the game, that rear wing, the roof scoop, a much more race-focused, but at the same time, street-level, almost like a homologation car, very reminiscent of the 90s road-going Le Mans cars that this car has. Now, ultimately, all it really turned out to be was a predecessor to the design style of what came to be called the SRT-10. But on the game, we can take the car to levels that it never actually reached in real life in terms of tuning. Now, in terms of the engine, interestingly enough, it's actually smaller in capacity than the SRT-10 onwards. From the SRT-10 to today, the engines kept on getting gradually bigger and bigger. 8.3, now an 8.4, I believe. This car was still in a very similar spec to the original Viper with that 8-litre V10 engine. This car is supercharged, or can be supercharged, up to a very strong 1,128 horsepower. And a borderline crazy 1,137 pound-feet of torque. So even more torque than power, which is very rare for a supercar. It only weighs 1,283 kilos, which is good, even for a supercar, especially one which isn't particularly hardcore or stripped out. It is inspired by racing cars, but it could have quite easily been a road car, so for that weight from this vehicle, you could consider that pretty good. As far as horsepower per tonne, well, it has so much power that it's not difficult for it to be good. It puts out 879 horsepower per tonne, which is around the same level as a GT class race car. As far as PP, it's actually one of the highest PP levels of any front-engine rear-wheel drive car on Gran Turismo. Interestingly enough, the highest, to my knowledge, PP front-engine rear-wheel drive car on Gran Turismo is actually a Viper, the Team Orica race car, at 685 pp. This car sits at just 10 pp less than that, at a pretty hefty 675. Now, bearing in mind that you can get a pretty impressive spec Le Mans prototype to sit at that level, that means that this car has a lot to live up to in terms of where it sits for competition. So can it actually live up to that? And also, can it live up to its price, being one of the most expensive Vipers in the game and kind of the most expensive street spec Viper. It obviously never was a street car, but you can imagine it being. After all, it has the space for a number plate, and it does, as far as I'm aware, comply with most street laws, if not all. So is it worth 1 million credits? That's a lot more than all of the other Vipers of a street level. Well, I would say, yes, it is worth 1 million, for the pure reason that this car, as I mentioned earlier, takes the Viper and what the Viper is capable of to a whole new level. Because as great as the Viper is in a straight line, let's face it, it's not the best of cars around corners. The ACR is excellent, but that's the exception, because that's the hardcore track focused even, version. All of the others are passable. They're okay around corners. They're not particularly amazing, not particularly bad. There are certainly worse cars, but there are also better ones. The GTS-R, though, especially with its long tail and much increased downforce, really takes the Viper's capabilities to a whole new stage of development. So yes, it can do over 290 in a straight line, as a Viper can, for the most part, on Gran Turismo, and it's one of the quickest accelerating cars in the game, but it can also outmaneuver and outpace virtually any other Viper around the track. So if you haven't bought the GTS-R yet, and you like cars like the Viper, I would definitely recommend that you give it a go, because it makes it one of, in effect, the ultimate street cars in the game. So that's it overall for this episode. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.